Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Word on the Snake Vine. I'm your host Ross Deacon, and on this podcast we talk all things about venomous animal related, from venom research, venomous animal husbandry, animal conservation, herping, and of course snakebite and snakebite initiatives from all around the world. On this episode, I have joining me as my co-host.
Hi, I'm Denny.
Hey, I'm Squirrel.
Hi, I'm Med, and before we start, I have to do a few formalities. Views expressed in this episode are the views of the guest host, not for the facility or the company they work for.
And today,
hi, I'm Thea. Oh, sorry.
Oh no, carry on. Please introduce yourself. It's rare that I usually have to do it.
All right. Okay. Hi, all the way from E-swatini. Hi, everybody. I am Thea Litischka-Koen, the founder of the E-swatini Anti-Venom Foundation.
Hi, Thea. How are you today?
Very well, thank you. Enjoying a summer's morning.
Yeah, you've got the summer while we've got the freezing cold. I think it's -1 degree here today. So
I think we're closer to 40 degrees.
Oh, that'd be quite nice. That'd be quite nice. But also with that comes other issues. So thank you so much for joining us today. I think this is I'm really looking forward to this episode because I think some of the issues you have in E-swatini with a few snakes that I hold quite close to my heart, and actually the reasons why I got into snake keeping and stuff. So I'm actually looking forward to hearing what you've got to say about snake biting in your area. And also I think it's an area that seems to be quite forgotten about. I think South Africa, there's big efforts in South Africa and stuff where people forget that E-swatini or Swaziland, as a lot of our listeners may know it as, seems to get quite forgotten about in that field. So I think we'll start with kind of, how did you get involved in snakebite? How did it come around? How did you get so involved in the Anti-Venom Foundation? And then going on from that, how did that evolve into e-strict and such on?
All right. So in about 2005, I think it was, my son, who was only 7 years at the time, had to draw a topic out of a hat at school, and that was his introduction to projects. And he put his little hand in a hat and drew out the topic snakes. So because it was his very first project, he was allowed to ask mom and dad to help. And we were given a guideline on what we could contribute and what we couldn't, and how to help with the research on the internet and so on. And of course, I got stuck in. I didn't know much about snakes. I was taught from a young age never to harm any snakes. So we would most certainly not kill any snakes. But I had no intimate or detailed knowledge at all. And as the two of us were researching the topic, I became more and more fascinated and decided that I wanted to do a course. And I came across African Reptiles and Venom in Johannesburg it's owned by Mike Perry. And I saw on his webpage that he offered snake identification, awareness, and handling courses. So I brought up the topic with my husband and I said to him, come on, Clifton, this sounds awesome. Let's go. And he just laughed and he thought I was nuts. But finally, I managed to convince him to make the 1,000-kilometer journey to go and attend this course. And on the way there, I stopped at the first bookshop and I bought a book on snakes. And all the way up there, I was reading about the various snakes. And went to the course, did the whole theory side of it. And after lunch, they said, all right, who would like to do the handling side of the course? And once again, I put my hand up and I thought to myself, I've come all this way. I may as well do the handling side. So he took us through the whole handling side, and we learned how to remove or to work with venomous snakes. And right at the end of the day, he said, all right, now we want to do the specialized black mamba handling. And there were about 30 people in the group, and it just went quiet. And I thought, I've come so far. And it's still early in the day. I may as well do it. So I put my hand up and I said, yeah, I think I'll do that. And I looked around and my hand was the only one up. And I thought, oh, is there something I don't know here? But anyway, so he said, all right, you signed up. I signed in another indemnity form, and the heavens opened and it started to pour. And he said, not a problem. And he started pushing the desks back in the little classroom. And I said to him, excuse me, Mike, what's going on? And he said, no, we'll just do it in here. And I said, you mad? And he said, no, this will be fine. I'll show you. I'll bring it in a bucket and I'll show you how to head the snake. And I was starting to regret my decision. But I was too embarrassed to say, no, look, I'm going to chicken out. So in comes this big black bin and a rope and a snake tongue. And he shows me on the rope how this is going to happen and how I should catch the mamba and let it reverse in the tongue. And then you grab it like this. And we practiced this a few times. But by then I had wet marks under my armpits. And I was thinking, oh, Lordy, what did I get myself into? And he opens the lid and there's this massive mamba. I've never seen anything like it. And he says, all right, now go for it. So I did everything that I had learned on the rope, and I managed to hold the mamba in my hand. And there I was holding this 3-meter black mamba by the head and the tail in my hand. And he said, all right, smile for the camera. It was the most horrific or hideous photograph. And there I am grinning at this mamba. But my eyes, the size of saucers. So we did all of that, and then he said, all right, now you have to drop it into the bin. And I said, you're mad. I'm too afraid to drop the snake. And he said, no, this is the technique. You take the tail, you hook it over your finger, and you drop it like this. And for about 30 minutes, he tried to convince me to drop the snake, and I just didn't have the courage to do so. So this went on and on and on, and finally I dropped the snake. And I was very... I was thrilled. I can't describe how it felt that I had managed to achieve this. And then he said to me, Thea, you know, this is the first time I've taught a woman how to catch a black mamba. And that in itself made me feel pretty impressed. But long story short, a couple of weeks later, in the post arrives this big brown envelope, and inside is my certificate that says successfully handled a black mamba. And there's this photograph of me holding the snake. My husband's got a bit of a weird sense of humor. So he was taking this photograph everywhere and showing everybody, saying, look at my crazy wife, look at my crazy wife. And it wasn't 2 days later, the phone rang. And it was somebody who said, look, I met your husband at Simunya Country Club, and he showed me a photograph of you holding a mamba. Please, I've got a snake in my house. Can you come and help me remove it? So that's how the whole snake rescue started. And that was 2006, if I'm not mistaken. And I started receiving more and more calls, going out from the north of Swaziland to the south, removing snakes. And I didn't realize what a problem it actually was. And my interest and my fascination in snakes all of a sudden became that of conservation and removing problematic snakes from homes and offices and anywhere that you can imagine. I opened a reptile park. I was thrilled with I had 73 different species of reptiles in my reptile park. And one day, in the middle of the day, a lady walked into my reptile park with a child on her hip. And I looked at this and I said, what on earth is wrong with your child? Because half a foot was missing. And she said to me, please, my child was bitten by a snake and nobody can help me. And I couldn't believe that any snake could do this sort of damage. So I immediately bundled her into a car and we drove to the nearest little clinic and walked into the doctor's office, and I said, please, you need to help. Look at this child. Something's very, very wrong. The mother says it's snakebite, but is it cancer? What on earth is wrong with this child's foot? And he looked at this and said, yes, this is snakebite. And he said, I must immediately report this woman for child abuse. And I said, I beg your pardon. And he says, this woman has neglected her child. Look at her child's foot. And I said, but hold on, here's her medical records. This child has been to 4 different clinics, including your clinic. She didn't neglect this child. It seems as if the medical fraternity has neglected this child. And I then took this child, picked her up, put her in my arms, and drove to another facility. There they admitted her into ward and started with the basic wound treatment. And I huffed and climbed into my car and drove back to my reptile park. And lo and behold, 2 weeks later, another mother walks into my reptile park. And this time she's got a little boy with her, and both his arms are so necrotic. The one arm from his hand right up to his elbow, to his shoulder, and the other arm from his elbow to his shoulder. And she said to me, I hear that you helped this little girl. Please, can you help my boy? They want to amputate his arms. And that's when I realized, there's something very wrong. And I started driving from clinic to clinic, hospital to ask, do you have antivenom? How many snake bites do you see? What are the challenges? And then I realized antivenom just wasn't available in Eswatini. In those days, Swaziland. Nobody knew anything about snake bites. They didn't trust antivenom because of the rate of anaphylaxis and superstition and a whole lot of other things. And I realized something had to be done. So in 2009, I registered the E-swatini, or the Swaziland Antivenom Foundation. And that's basically how I became involved.
That's pretty...
Amazing.
Yes, that's pretty amazing. You can hear from the stories kind of how much they've affected you, and you can kind of... they're very personal stories for you. You can tell. That's really, really good. Because we can't spit my words out this morning. You can tell that they really needed that help. It seems like the E-swatini, or Swaziland as it was then, really needed that help for somebody to kind of try and change people's minds on antivenom and kind of get people the help. And it's just incredible how you went from a project in 2006, was it you said, and then to opening in 2009, an antivenom, the Antivenom Foundation. That's such a short period of time that things really changed, really changed.
Yeah, it was incredibly difficult. I don't come from a medical background. I'm actually a businesswoman, so I can read a balance sheet. But to read a medical publication is very challenging, or it was in those days. And I was trying to teach myself. I had all these black mambas and other snakes in my reptile park, and I had the basics. Mike had taught me the basics, but I didn't really understand how snakebite or how venom works or how antivenom works. And I had to try and teach myself. And I would sit with the dictionary in one hand and the publication. It would take me hours to read all these medical documents, and it was really difficult. And it was only when I started interacting with doctors and became getting more and more calls for assistance that I realized my little bit of knowledge exceeded what the doctors knew. And it then became very clear that at university, very few, or the snakebite doesn't receive enough attention. They're not taught about snakebite. It literally is a 20 or a 40-minute lecture, and the doctor's supposed to know how to treat snakebite. So unless you taught yourself as a physician or a doctor or clinician, they just didn't have the knowledge. And this is a fundamental problem throughout Africa, that the clinicians are not taught enough on how to treat snakebite. So they are insecure and they lack the in-depth knowledge on what to do.
Would you think in a place like in sub-Saharan Africa, where snakebite is such an issue, that when these doctors go through their training, you would think it'd be you think there'd be such a focus on this that it's surprising that there's nothing.
It's not. It's like, you know what? Snakebite has only just been declared a neglected tropical disease. Why did it take so long to do that? And it's the same thing. We need to get snakebite into the modules, into the universities, and we need to do an in-depth training. It's just not there at the moment.
It's
And even in E-swatini at the university, I was just going through their training module, and it is 2 pages long.
wow.
For
So
me as an
it's a
outsider,
problem. It's a really big problem.
for me as an outsider, it baffles me constantly that it isn't a priority, or it just becomes a priority until now.
But this isn't this the tragedy about snakebite?
Yeah, yeah,
Is
it
that
is.
it has been neglected on each and every front. And it's not as if snakebite has just started happening. Snakebite has been, as long as we've been on this earth, snakebite has been a problem. And it's 2019, and we still don't have the basics. And this is
Yeah,
just totally unacceptable. We need to catch a wake up, because the suffering out there is just absolutely horrendous.
And I think it is happening more and more. Like people are getting more and more involved now.
Yes,
And I think
about time.
about time. Yes, yeah.
Mm,
And I think we found with doing this podcast, I think we found that actually people like yourselves are looking for a platform to kind of try and highlight some of these issues and some of these areas that most people just still don't know about, even though it is now been recognised as a neglected tropical disease. There's still hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people in this world that just still don't have a clue that this is an issue, because we sit in an area, we live in an area that does not suffer from snakebite at all. So we just don't
yes.
understand the full consequences of what people like yourselves and people in the Swatini and sub-Saharan Africa or India or whoever are actually going through. We just can't understand it.
And the reason for that is it affects the poor people. It affects those people that don't have the internet, that don't have a smartphone, that have nothing. You know what? These people live in traditional mud and stick homes. These are the people that are affected. So it doesn't affect our lives, really. And this is why it's gone unnoticed for so long. It's just these people have been suffering tremendously without anybody realizing how much or how many people are actually affected by snakebite. It's almost like an ostrich with your head in the sand scenario. People don't realize the extent of the suffering and how many people are actually dying. And even the figures that are out there now are way lower. It's a total underestimation. It is much more than what we realize, because it's not even a notifiable or a recordable issue. Until it's still here in E-swatini, it is under injury. It falls under injury, not snakebite.
So I think that kind of leads us quite well on to one of the other questions I was going to ask a little bit later, but kind of because it's recorded as injury, does that mean that actually knowing what snakes are doing the biting and the species that are of issue in E-swatini, is that quite hard to work out what the species are because of that?
Officially, yes, absolutely. Officially, there is no record. Unofficially, I know what's happening because I'm working with the victims of snakebite, so I can tell you. But it's never been recorded officially. Now it is falling under its own category, snakebite, and we are now collecting data on snakebite. We're one of the very few African countries that are now recording snakebite officially. So now we will start collecting the data, and what I've been preaching for the last 15 years will now become official.
That's great. That's great. That's going to make such a difference to obviously eShrik with the clinical work that you guys are doing there. It's going to make a big difference to actually know and have official information of what the issues are and what species you need to be targeting and the treatments you need to be targeting. It's going to make a big difference, hopefully, to the people of E-swatini.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been collecting data, and it's been on a voluntary basis. So I designed the data collection form, and these books were distributed to various clinics and hospitals. And we would ask and beg, please, if you see a snake bite or if you're dealing with a snake bite, can you please record this information? But you know what, if you're not told to do so and you've just been asked as a favor, and the workload in these hospitals, very often they didn't complete the book, and it was only when I went to the wards and found the victims and then we'd go and fill in the book, we managed to get some data. And the data that we did receive over the 2-3 years that we were collecting was astronomical. And we had an idea, but it was we were never able to officially publish. But now that it has the Ministry of Health's stamp on it, and the medical facilities have been told that it's compulsory that they have to record every snake bite, we can now really tackle the problem properly.
So, what on? Obviously, I know you probably can't say too much, but what are the troublesome species in E-swatini? Kind of what are the ones that are causing the most fatalities against the most injuries and
All
such
right.
forth?
So our biggest problem is the Mozambique spitting cobra, the Naja mozambica. It is biting. It is the snake responsible for most serious envenomations. It's over 60% of our snake bite victims are Mozambique spitting cobra. And the majority of those, once again, in the 60-70% are sleeping when they get bitten. So that's our biggest problem. Yes, we do have puff adder bites. Yes, we do have mamba bites. All the fatalities are generally attributed to the black mamba. But the Mozambique spitting cobra, Nacha mozambica, is my nemesis. It's my biggest problem. It's the country's biggest problem.
Yeah, and I think if you speak to some of the South African snakebite specialists, they have a similar problem in
Isn't
South
it
Africa
amazing,
as well.
though, how it's changed? If you look at old literature, it says the puff adder is the biggest problem, and it was the biggest killer. But it's only, and I think it's because of the emphasis or the spotlight on E-swatini, that people have now realized it's actually not the puff adder. It's the Mozambican spitting cobra that's the problem.
Well, you still get people citing on a lot of groups and on forums that puff adders are still the biggest killer, because, as you say, a lot of literature still says that.
Totally incorrect.
Or they go from that straight to black mambas are the biggest. They have the biggest bite numbers. It's like, oh, hang on a minute, like
it's totally incorrect. Yes. Kenya, yes, the biggest problem there is puff adder, but South Africa and Eswatini and my area here generally, it is the Mozambique spitting cobra. It wins the race by far.
And some of the injuries from Mozambique spitting cobra bites are just horrific, absolutely horrific.
You know, just this week, the hospitals and the snakebite victims I'm working with, I can't even describe the wounds. You know what? I can't put it in words how these people are suffering. But the worst is they are receiving antivenom and they are still getting severe necrosis. So even when we are getting the victims to a hospital in 45 minutes, an hour, and the treatment is spot on, and we are using the antivenom and we are doubling the dose, we are still getting necrosis. And this is something that I'm still struggling to get across and to get people to really understand and believe me. But even, you know what I'm saying? And this is fundamentally the problem. In 2006 or 2008, when I realized what the problem was, that the doctors have no faith in antivenom. And I couldn't understand why. Yes, they are afraid of anaphylaxis. But the problem is they are using, and when they did use the antivenom, they still had such a poor outcome that they were saying it's so expensive and we're using it. But look, it didn't help this person. And then the puzzle started to fall into place. And it's because it doesn't respond, the antivenom doesn't respond very well to the venom of the Naja mozambica.
That's quite interesting, because do you use polyvalent in E-swatini?
Yes. We use the Gold Star product. It's the SAVP product. It's awesome. It is really a very good product. It is very effective against puff adders and black mambas and snouted cobras and all the other snakes. But when it comes to the Naja mozambica, it is not that effective.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. Quite interesting, and I assume that that's going to make up quite a bit of work for E-swatini. Will be looking at the Mozambique bite treatment,
Yes.
and antivenom, and kind of how doing the clinical work on kind of how that can be improved.
Yes, so there is. We are working on the venom of the Naja mozambica. We're going to be doing a study on all cytotoxic bites because we don't have the test kits to work out or to be able to identify the responsible species in the hospital. Yet we're working on trying to find a solution for that too. But so we're covering all cytotoxic bites, and we are going to look at between 120 and 150 bites and record all the data. So the circumstances of the bite, what time, the occupation, how long, the first aid treatments, the herbal treatment, how long did it take to get to the hospital, how many vials of antivenom did you receive, and the outcome. And we are hoping to get a pattern that will explain more about the species that are responsible and the final outcome with or without antivenom.
Sorry about that. Yeah, that'll be absolutely incredible to kind of see what's, as you say, what if there is a pattern there to do it. So one thing that I have read in the past is that E-swatini with the spitting cobra bites, that actually ringtails could be taking up quite a few bites there compared to other areas in South Africa. I'm not sure how true that is or not, really.
Unfortunately, not true either.
I'm not sure
I
either.
have personally not dealt with a single ringtails bite on a human.
That's
Perhaps
quite interesting.
last night. Okay, I'm waiting for a call, actually. There is a snakebite victim that was bitten last night by a snake that was identified as possibly a ringtails, and he was taken to a medical facility in the middle of the night last night, but it's not confirmed yet. So this might be my very first ringtails bite, but it could also be something else. But I have not worked with a snakebite victim with a confirmed ringtails bite yet.
That's quite interesting because when you talk to some of the South African snakebite people, they have a very similar response to that actually, because they're a species that don't tend to end up in towns and townships very often and villages very often, that they don't tend to bite many people.
No, and they're reluctant to bite, believe it or not. You've really got to antagonize a ringtails before it will react. It's a lot of showmanship, but that's about it.
Yeah. The
so I don't even know. But in dogs, the symptoms are very neurotoxic. But we're not quite sure yet in humans if it's more neurotoxic than cytotoxic. So we still have to investigate.
That's quite interesting. That's really interesting, actually. But I didn't because obviously reading again in literature about ringtails being quite an issue across the whole of southern Africa, it kind of seems that obviously literature, as we know, seems to be quite incorrect.
I think it's outdated.
Yeah, it seems to be very much outdated. So I kind of we'll move it on to E-swatini, because obviously that's just been kind of announced, and the partnership that you have there with other snakebite foundations and such forth there. So kind of how did E-swatini come about, and kind of what is the reasoning behind it, and kind of what will be the work and kind of the work going on there going forward?
Another interesting development by chance, I would imagine. I was invited to be one of the members of the WHO roadmap on snakebite. And I was invited to go to London with the Wellcome Trust so that we could work on the roadmap, the WHO roadmap. And there I met people from Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, and speaking about the different problems that we're having. And it was amazing to learn the people that were involved. There were 22 of us from all over the world, actually. And we had people from Indonesia and in India and so on. And we were all talking about our individual challenges in our individual countries and so on. But that's when I met the guys from Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. And from there, very fortunate for E-swatini, we made that connection. And Liverpool, with the Wellcome Trust, agreed to partner with the Anti-Venom Foundation. And we have now just launched ESRIC, which is in partnership with the Ministry of Health, the Anti-Venom Foundation, and Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. And it's a breakthrough for E-swatini. These guys are awesome. They do tremendous work. And this is the first real positive step in the right direction, I feel, to solve and to understand some of the problems that we are facing here in E-swatini.
Yeah, and I think you can look at the work that they have done in other countries like Kenya and Nigeria, and the great work that they've done there, and it, as you say, can make a real difference.
Absolutely, this is a game changer for us. I do feel this is a game changer for us. We've now got some muscle, and these are highly respected individuals and the facility. So I'm very optimistic that we're now going to get some real support and backup. You know what? You can't fight a problem if you don't have statistics. You're just blowing into the wind. You need facts, you need figures, and you need the guys out there to be able to just substantiate your information or what you're saying. And then hopefully with that we can then get some people on board to try and solve the problem.
Yeah, that'll be absolutely great. So, and as you say, it will make a big difference. So kind of moving on from that, you've recently also had a snakebite conference in E-swatini. How did that snakebite conference come about? And kind of, it looked like to me, looking online, that it was very well attended. And kind of, do you have plans to continue to do that going forward as well?
Yes. So also that's our snakebite symposium. It's an annual event. It started. This was our 11th year. And that also started with the very first child I spoke about, with her foot, Zamu Guhle. When Zamu was bitten and brought to me, I didn't know enough, or I didn't have the confidence, and I decided to do a very controversial thing, and I put it on social media. And I said, people, please, somebody needs to help me. Look at this child. I need help. And I received a phone call from Dr. Sean Bush. And he said, what on earth's happening there? And I said, you better tell me, because this is just horrific. And 2 days later, he landed in E-swatini. And he came and looked at Zamuguhle at the hospital and took her through to, he actually took her overseas for treatment and for skin graft at the facility where he was at the time. And he then came back and did the very first snakebite symposium. And I think we were thrilled. We had 30 people at the symposium. And a year later, people were saying, are you going to have another? Are you going to put another event on? And I did. And we grew from 30 people at our very first symposium to almost 300 now. We have about 300 people coming through for the symposium now, and it's based, we focus on the clinical management of snakebite. We speak about just the clinical management of snakebite, and we attract people from all over Africa and even abroad. They come and attend the symposium. And it's a remarkable tool to just sit down and listen to the challenges from the doctors here in Eswatini and Mozambique and South Africa and Kenya and Botswana, and we talk about hands-on practical medical management tools to try and help the victims of snakebite.
And I think that's one of the things that's different about your symposium to some of the others, is that you are doing that hands-on practical kind of treatment, rather than some of the other symposiums will talk about it, but they'll also, it's usually covered up in some other research that they've done, where they're actually talking about the research that's going on and the research that they're doing, rather than actually this is the best way to treat this kind of snake bite. And I think that's could be one of the reasons why it's so popular, especially in an area like the area you live, that is that type of, as you say, that kind of type of education is really needed.
You know what? This is the practical help the guys need. We need to help people, and we need to teach, whether it's a first aider or a first responder or a paramedic or a doctor, a surgeon. So we discuss everything about snakebite, and we start off with the do's and don'ts about snake identification, and we do that very quickly because that's not so important. And then we do the first aid, and for the ambulance, the ambo guys, what do you do when you go to the clinic? And these are very rural clinics with not much, but you can keep a black mamba victim alive, and this is what you do. And then we go on to, we just work through, we've also got a snakebite treatment protocol. And this is something else that has been a life changer here in Eswatini, is we took the WHO snakebite treatment guidelines, as well as other fundis out there like Dr. Blaylock, and we combined the treatment, the medical treatment, specifically for our species here in Eswatini. And we drew up a document. It's only 23 pages long, and it's just keep it simple, ABC on how to treat snakebite. So during the symposium, we always go through that document. So we start from the first aid, and we work all the way through to the surgery, as well as physiotherapy and mental health. It's another one that we don't think about when it comes to snakebite victims, is the mental health aspect. So that is what we cover. And fundamentally, that is what our symposium is about. We don't talk about cross-reactivities or anything like that. We focus on trying to empower the clinicians to deal with snakebite, to give the snakebite victim the best possible outcome.
I think that's really great. I think that could be useful for a lot of people, not just in Eswatini, but all over the world, if more of these kind of symposiums were to take place. Because I think, as you say, for a lot of doctors and stuff, they're just not taught this stuff.
No.
So having an option to go somewhere to actually understand kind of what they can do to help these people and help save these people's lives is pretty incredible. I think the work that you do in there is genuinely incredible.
But you know what, this is something that, okay, now I've just heard that Namibia is doing their very first snakebite symposium. They came to our symposium last year, that's it. And they went back and they drew up their own treatment protocol. And next year, 2020, they're having their first snakebite symposium.
We've spoken to Francois about this recently, actually. He again, somebody else again like yourself who's doing absolutely incredible work in the area that they live in.
Yeah, so he came 3 years ago, and then he brought a doctor with him last year, and they are now taking the module that's working for us. You look at, we've tried and tested and failed and succeeded, but we've done the homework, and so they can now take what they've taken from Eswatini and go. It has to be unique. Every country has got their unique issues, and they need to then adapt the document and the module to suit them. And I think this is what they've done. And I just last week received an invitation to go to Namibia next year to participate in that symposium. And this makes all the hard work so worthwhile, doesn't it? So it's amazing. So if we can get Botswana to do the same thing and Mozambique to do the same thing, we can really save many lives and limbs.
So speaking to somebody like Sophie von Beres from Health Action International, who's got good ties with Botswana, may be a way to start that, helping that area to do something like this.
Yes,
It could be
and yeah, and Tanzania, Uganda, and Zimbabwe. Oh, how Zimbabwe is going through such a terrible time at the moment with snakebite. You know, they've got many challenges there. So all these countries, if they could just each have a snakebite champion and just start, you know, you have to start somewhere. And the problem is not that big. It becomes manageable. You just take little bits and you try and solve little problems at it and just work through it. And it will make a big difference. Okay, it doesn't solve the problem overnight. There are many challenges, and especially financial, that have to be overcome. But you can save lives just by doing a couple of basic things.
Yeah. No.
You've mentioned quite a few times about the different challenges faced in different countries. When we talk to people from snakebite initiatives, we always like to kind of get a grasp of what the challenges they face in their countries are. Most of the time, they do all have very similar challenges, just slightly different. What are the ones you face in E-swatini?
Okay, what are the... All right, so there are quite a few. Okay, transport's one of our major issues. So the 70% of our people live in very rural areas, and no electricity. Transport's a major. Once the sun goes down, there is no more public transport. We don't have sufficient ambulances to respond. So and the response time is not that great. So that's our biggest challenge, is trying to get the victims to a medical facility that the patient's still viable, with a neurotoxic bite, obviously, and with a cytotoxic bite, time is tissue. So we need to try and get the victims to a medical facility so that they can get the help. We are fantastic in the sense that many of the rural areas do have clinics, just rural clinics. They need to be empowered to deal with snake bite and not try and panic. What happens very often is they panic and they transfer the patient to the next facility. So we need to teach and empower these local clinics to accept these victims, stabilize them, put them on an ambu bag if necessary, remove any harmful practices like tourniquets for cytotoxic bites. Just teach them the basics, teach them to recognize symptomatically what the symptoms are, so the syndromic management of snake bite, and empower them that they can start with the treatment of the snake bite victim or stabilize the victim, and then move the victim to a bigger facility where there is antivenom. So now call the ambulance to come and fetch the victim, take the victim to a lodge or a hospital where they can receive the adequate treatment. So I would imagine empowering the clinics is a big challenge. Transporting the victim is a big challenge. But financially, we are also in a bit of a crisis here in E-swatini, so just buying the basics, the antivenom, is a bit of a problematic area at the moment.
That's again, transport is one of the biggest issues that we hear from
major.
most people, most countries. Kenya, for example, with the trialing of the motorbike ambulances is seeming very positive, but if that can be translated to every country is then something that needs to be seen further down the line. As you know yourself, and you say that you've got clinics in your rural areas, which is a bit different from what I know of different countries, which is already a big positive. But if they lack the information, the confidence, the education behind it, it can be detrimental, like you say. And the other part is, because you've got such a high rate of cytotoxic bites, do you find that there's a large burden on the aftercare that causes trouble for yourself?
All right. So first of all, the first, what we are trying to do is, unfortunately, in E-swatini, like many other countries, the go-to first aid is tourniquet. And with a cytotoxic bite, that is just terrible. So we need to teach the first responders not to do or not to apply a tourniquet. So that's the one thing. Then, yes, we can get the antivenom in, but as you say, the effects of the bite, it's 3-4 months in a medical facility, literally that long with wound care. And then afterwards, if amputation is needed or additional surgery and physiotherapy, and yes, it's huge burden that we have to carry. And it's just basics, buying wheelchairs or crutches or artificial limbs or physiotherapy or trying to deal with keloid scarring, and then of course the mental problems. It's so traumatic. It is so traumatic.
The mental health issue is finally being talked about, but still, as you say, it's just not thought about. Everyone instantly talks about the traumatic effects and the physical effects, so cytotoxic with all the necrosis. But then it's very easy to miss over the fact that the person going through that experience is probably experiencing pain that none of us could ever understand without going through it. The later effects on life, the effects of the whole treatment of the bite. I'm not sure, you haven't mentioned fasciotomies. Is that something that is an issue as well in E-swatini, or?
Oh, that's a feather in our caps, I must say. That practice has, to a large extent, been stopped. So yes, we still have the odd fasciotomies taking place, but not nearly on the scale that it did in the past. We've managed to take snakebite away from the surgeon into the GP's hands. So that has made, that in itself has been massive. So,
which hopefully translates to less of a mental health burden, because it's not a large cut being made in an already damaged area, which hopefully could help. But again, it's not easy to measure that without a lot of data behind it.
Yeah, the wounds that are left behind from a Mozambique spitting cobra, it doesn't matter, it's still traumatic. If you can get enough antivenom in, there is limited damage, or there's a lot less damage. But if there's a delay in getting to a medical facility, or if no antivenom was administered, then you've got a big problem. I mean, the wounds are something that it's difficult to describe. And it literally is 3 months in the medical facility of wound care and skin grafts and so on and so forth. But let me give you this one story. There was a lady who was paralyzed, and she had very little. No, she had no movement. She could just wiggle her toes ever so slightly, and she was lying in bed at night, and she saw this Mozambique spitting cobra coming into her room, a little mud and stick home. And she saw the snake, and she started to call for help, and nobody heard her. And she watched this Mozambique spitting cobra hunt, and it went all over the room, over her pots and her food and her shoes and so on and so forth. And she saw it climb onto her bed, and she was screaming for help, but she could not do anything to help herself, and nobody heard her calls for help. And she saw this Mozambique spitting cobra come, and she was obviously very hot here in our area, so she didn't have anything covering her. It was just her bare legs, and the snake curled up next to her feet on her bed. And she said, "Lord, please help me. I need to kick the snake off my bed." So she tried to concentrate and focus all her power onto her feet, and she said, "I'm going to kick the snake off this bed." But all she could do was just wiggle her toes, or ever so slightly, and the snake bit her. And this happened, not once, not 5 times. She was bitten 5 times by this Mozambique spitting cobra. And she only got help the next day when they came to see and see how she was doing. And she said, "Oh God," and she was in so much pain. And by then, obviously, the venom was doing its thing, and she had tremendous necrosis. And I went to go visit her in the hospital, and she was so traumatized that they gave her her own room, but she turned her face towards the wall and would not look the other way. and they were not allowed to switch the lights off. So can you imagine the trauma that poor woman went through? Now you can imagine a 3-year-old child or a 4-year-old child that's been bitten and goes through those horrific the treatments, the daily scrubbing of those wounds and so on. The trauma is almost impossible to try and describe.
This shivers down my spine. Actually, give me shivers down my spine.
But this is what's happening. I mean, the reality of you wake up and there's a snake that's just bitten you on your mouth or your eye or your chest or your hand or and it's terrifying. You wake up from sleep and there's a snake that has just bitten you. Now children, so many children, about 45% of the victims are children, young children. So yes, it's very traumatic.
And I think we just can't understand, as you say, you just can't understand unless you've been through that. How?
Yes.
We can't understand this. This is far from our bed. We don't have to deal with anything like this.
If we want to interact with venomous snakes, they're on our terms. They are typically locked away securely in a different room for us. We optionally choose this.
We are prepared.
Yeah, it's not something that, if we've got a bad day, we can turn around and say we're not touching any of the snakes that we personally choose to work with. In your day-to-day life, you just cannot imagine that for us, what we think is a period where we will interact with, for example, our snakes that we keep in very managed, controlled settings. If that's your everyday life where you're walking down the road and you can just be bitten, you're in your bed and you can just be bitten, that in itself already adds a lot of fear to the situation.
But then that story of a paralyzed woman who had to sit through and watch this snake get closer and closer and then bite her 5 times. Like, I just can't describe like the fear and everything else that woman would have been going through. And then
yes. And then to have half your leg missing because of the venom.
Yeah, these people, you just can't. And then to see how some people react to this online and kind of, and that when people hear the stories and you talk to people like yourselves, like every single person we talk to has a story like this that's massively impacting them in their lives or impacts us in ours, and do it and make drives us on for wanting to do this podcast and talk to more and more people even more to kind of find these stories and hear these stories. It kind of it's just they're just adding up, and the stories are all so different but all with the same outcome. And it's kind of it's crazy, and as you say, we just can't put into words or can't comprehend the fear and everything that these people must be going through, and then the post-traumatic stress that these people are going through, and the after treatment and just.
But even on that in itself, the kind of aftercare. The aftercare you were saying is there, but then the mental health care isn't. So what we can imagine in our situation, we have the access to this treatment. When there is no access to that treatment, it makes it even worse. When people don't talk about the mental health issues, it gets pushed to the side. It adds to the trouble that the sufferers will go through.
Yeah, it's you know what, it's yes, snakebite is a problem, but it's much more of a problem what people realize. It really is traumatic, very traumatic.
Yeah, and it's a self-perpetuating cycle as well, because then these people can't work, then they can't afford the treatment that they've had, so then that puts them back into that mental, affects their mental health and their well-being again, and it's just a self-perpetuating cycle that these people have, unfortunately, because of their circumstance, where they live, the poverty that a lot of these people live in that do get bitten, it's just horrific, absolutely horrific. And if for something that could be as we well and truly know, that could be helped quite easily. And there's things that, as you've said on this podcast, that people, if they know how to do it, can help somebody have a better outcome very easily and
Yes.
very quickly.
Yes.
Even without the antivenom, with just doing certain things, you can help people survive, and help people survive with the better rate of not having the other horrific traumatic injuries and mental health issues as well. So like it's and hopefully things now we have places like E-swatini, K-swatini in Kenya and N-swatini in Nigeria and stuff for doing the research on treatment, and then we have the WHO that are taking this more seriously, and more people seem to be gathering into the more and more clinicians, more and more people seem to be gathering into the snakebite industry, and well, not industry, but into the snakebite circles. That hopefully this can be countries like yourself, like, we're going to have these big game changers very quickly, and these big advancements very quickly. It's going to help so many people's lives.
Yeah. You know what? A lot of people are now involved, and there are a lot of scientists involved, and there's a lot of research going on. But please don't forget, while all these clever people are doing all of those things, I'm still running around like an idiot, trying to help snakebite victims. So, yes, people are doing a lot of things, but the actual hands-on work at the moment is still continuing. The need is greater than ever. So the scientists must get on and do their thing, but support the little guys that are trying to make a difference. Please, the suffering is not going over, or it's not solved. The problem's not solved because we've got ESRIC. We need to continue trying to help the people. The snakebite victim last night and the rest of them that happened. I'm still struggling to help these people. And so the need is still great. Please people mustn't sit back now and say, Liverpool is now involved, the problem is solved. We're far from having this problem solved. The support is still desperately needed.
And that is the main reason that we do this podcast, is we've had people like yourself on, Francois, Dr. Tree, Mariani from Indonesia, and Joss Luis from India, and people from all over the world that are effectively the people on like yourself that are on the floor, you're on the ground, you're the people who are trying to help the people of the country that you live in, and it is your community, to try and help people's lives and save people's lives where you are. And I think that's one of the wonderful things that we're trying to do with this podcast, is give that voice to you guys to go, put your hands up and go, hey, all this work's being done, and you can see it at all these different symposiums, but look, we're still here, we're still doing this work, and these are the issues that we have. And to be honest, this has been an absolutely incredible episode, like the stories that you've told, and that it's been absolutely incredible. Like, so thank you so much for coming on.
It's a pleasure.
It's been an absolutely incredible episode, and I think our listeners are really, really going to enjoy this episode, and hopefully it will give us a platform for them to understand more what's happening in the country, that in E-swatini, and
that's a huge pleasure.
Really good. Yeah, so thank you very much. I have just seen the time; it's just been an hour, and that was been a really quick hour for me, and hopefully the others will. The other hosts will agree with that. So thank you so much for coming on. And I'd also just like to thank our listeners for listening and getting involved as usual. Please do get involved online on our Facebook, on Instagram, and also on our website at wordonthesnakebite.co.uk, where there is also some new merchandise for sale on there. All sale profit from the merchandise sales does go back into snakebites and healthcare around, and different snakebite initiatives around the world for handling equipment and such forth for people as well. And also we do have a Patreon as well, if you'd like to get involved in our Patreon and also donate to these charities through that way. Also, every piece of money that's made on this podcast does go back and will go back into snakebite initiatives all around the world. which is something that we as hosts are very, very passionate about, that we do. And we keep funding this podcast from our own pocket and make sure that we help as many people as we possibly can. So thank you everybody for listening, and until the next episode, good night.